Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist. To support the podcast, head over to patreon.com/wellness with Jer. You can sign up for a membership. Benefits for the membership range from getting a shout out on podcast episode or YouTube video, all the way up to getting access to video episodes, ad-free episodes. We're going to work on some virtual meetups with guests from the podcast in the future. So head over to patreon.com/wellness with Jared to support us. You can find a link to our merch store in the show notes, or you can like, subscribe, and share the podcast wherever it is that you're listening. We appreciate all the support and you taking the time to hang out with us and talk about mental health. Today, I am joined by owner and operator of the therapy office, Becca Ferguson. Becca, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no, I'm super glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on here. I saw the name of your podcast. I was like, "Oop, called out."
Yeah, it's been really fun connecting to people, and also I think clients don't hear this from us very often, that like we do our own work, and so really trying to normalize destigmatize mental health. I'm in the Midwest where it's still heavily stigmatized, and so really working to normalize that, hey, this is work for everyone.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm in Arkansas. I always joke around when I'm like talking to people that are outside of Arkansas. I'm like, Arkansas is the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. So stigma is really big here. Like we just
Yeah.
like to tie it all up in there, make sure our Thanksgiving dinner fits, and then just like buckle it all in there. So yeah, it can be challenging for sure. Stigma's real.
Yes, for sure. I always like to start with the same question, which is, how'd you get into the mental health field?
Yeah, what story do you want? Because I got a couple. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, honestly, I wasn't going to like mental health and counseling was never an option for me because I didn't know that it existed.
Mhm.
So I didn't even know that counseling existed until I was in college. I grew up in a very conservative Christian home. So, where you get all your guidance and everything comes from that religious structure, the religious leaders, et cetera, et cetera. When it came, you know, I had struggles during my youth, I would say. I had a very challenging teenage experience. It felt like a couple decades happened in like the couple of year spans. It was very challenging for sure. And during that time, I did have a couple of mental health challenges. You look back at it now and you're like, duh, that was anxiety, or duh, that was depression, or something of that nature, or oh, those were suicidal thoughts. Like, that's interesting. But I didn't know that any of those things were actually tied to mental health until I went to college and I separated from that atmosphere and I was away from my family, and then all of a sudden, I was having to figure things out all by myself. And I started seeing the on campus counselor.
Mhm.
Um, Not the best counselor that I've ever seen in my whole entire life. I was struggling with like an eating disorder at that point in time, and I was going several days without eating. And I got found in one of the rooms at college that I was at, passed out, and I had told one person that I hadn't ate in several days. And then the next thing you know, I'm in a wheelchair being carted across campus, going to the counselor's office, and the counselor says, I would diagnose you with anorexia, but you're not skinny enough
Oh
for me to
dear.
do that. And I was like, okay, so I'm fine, just like everyone's told me my whole life. And then the college that I went to, they got rid of therapy after my freshman year because it wasn't warranted anymore as a needed expense. Thankfully, they've brought it back um, since then. But I mean, the way that you could get therapy after that was going to your RA inside your dorm and telling them exactly what you were struggling with. And then they would deem whether or not you needed counseling or not.
Oh,
And so I was
geez.
like, nope, not doing that. So I just like got into unhealthy romantic relationships to dissociate from everything bad that was happening with me, which is also a really healthy thing to do. Take my advice. But I did take a group dynamics course just to get some credit hours my junior year, and I loved it. Oh my gosh. I was just like, this is the vibe. We were like five chicks all in a circle, just chilling, talking about our really bad romantic relationships. Like all of us are in complete different places. And I'm like, this is a vibe. I love this. And then I took a psychology course and I failed it, like bombed it. Terrible. I'm like, I don't understand this brain stuff. This is science. No bueno, not doing it. And so I backed out. My first degree is in radio, television, video, strategic communication, and broadcasting. And so I got that and then went into ministry because obviously that's the stuff that you do after you get a broadcasting degree. And so I was a youth minister for a couple months and I just realized, like, man, these kids are coming to me with some hard shit. Like, I can't tell them anything. Like, I can't be like, oh, wow, you're really struggling with this. Let me give you real advice. I just had to be like, Jesus doesn't approve of that behavior, so I'm gonna need you to calm down real quick. And I don't want that. And so I didn't like doing that. The church that I was at was pretty abusive. I went through some pretty crappy things in that atmosphere, and then moved back home at the advice of a therapist that I was seeing at the time. He told me, move back home, go to a grad school, become a therapist, do your thing. And so, I listened after waiting a significant amount of time for me to be able to make my own decision. And I loved grad school. It was the first time I ever got a 4.0 because I mean ADHD, hyperfocus, there you go. But yeah, I mean it's a little convoluted story. I never thought it was in the cards for me. I think there's a lot of people in my previous life that are scared of my profession because they're afraid I'm going to psychoanalyze them, which I'm like, already have. Watch out. But yeah, that's a little bit about how I became a therapist.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there that we could dig into.
Yeah, you're welcome. I like to
I
keep
think,
the talking points going. So there you
yeah.
go.
Well, and I was raised also very conservative Christian, and my mom loves and supports me, but doesn't talk about my profession at all
Yep.
because for that generation, and also the people in my family who are still very conservative Christian. Like psychology is scary, therapy
It's
is scary.
terrifying. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh. Like my father, which he doesn't listen to me on these things, so I'll blast him. It's fine. I love him to death. However, he likes to impress me when it comes to therapy. And so, oh gosh, it was like 3 years ago. I'm down at my parents' house because I'm doing wedding stuff. I was planning, like, I was getting ready for the wedding. And we're just sitting watching live PD. My dad's a police officer, just chilling on the couch watching live PD. He just gets up, pauses the TV, and he looks at me. He's like, well, I had my psych eval for work the other day. And I was like, did you? That's cool. And he says, yeah, he said that I'm normal with borderline tendencies. And I was like, Dad, I damn near choked on everything that I had inside me. And I was like, we might want to look into that before you start telling people that. Um, Thankfully, we have looked into it. He's not going to go to therapy, but I was like, I think that he needed the guy that was doing a psych eval had one of those computers that we used with dinosaurs, the ones with the boxes
sure.
attached
Yeah.
to the back of him, you know. And I think it was like the DSM-2 is what.
Oh no.
Yeah, and so I was like, we might need to reevaluate this and look at some trauma that's going on. But yeah, I mean, psychology is scary. Therapy is terrifying when you're raised in an environment where you're not supposed to feel your feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a thing I've talked about a lot on the podcast because I get a lot of religious trauma folks on here, but like high control religion teaches you your body is bad, especially if you grow up with some toxic theology around original sin or stuff like that, where you're learning not to trust your body. So then like looking at your body, listening to your body, learning how your brain works, like that's all very scary stuff. Um, which we can circle back on that. But I do want to talk about college counseling a little bit since you
Yeah.
brought that up.
Yeah.
because I spent 5 years in higher ed, and those poor counselors are almost always burned out because their caseloads are huge. And
Oh yeah.
while while I don't condone what your college counseling experience, what your counselor told you, I will have some grace for those people, because like colleges as a whole do not support mental health. That idea of we're going to cut it because it's not needed or we can't make money off of it is like the absolute most backwards approach to how we should be talking about mental health.
Yeah, I feel like, that original session that I had, and obviously when you go through therapy, there's certain sentences that stick out inside your memories, right? Certain things that therapists say, and sometimes like clients will come to me and say, a couple of years ago you said this to me, and I'm like, I don't remember telling you that, but like, I'm awesome. That's great for reminding me and telling, for thinking about that. I'm glad I made that connection for you. But in that college experience, when, I'm struggling with this disordered eating, I'm attempting to figure out like who it is in my own body and my identity. There were some other things that we worked on in that space. I probably had like, I look back and I'm like, was it only like 5 or 6 sessions? I don't think it was anything, that I was seeing him super long term. But, we never untangled the core of what I was dealing with in that
Hmm.
space. That space wasn't created for untangling the core of what it was that I was dealing with. It wasn't about developing my identity. It was about um, resolving the conflict that was right in front of us, right?
Sure.
You're not eating. So, like, why are you not eating? And it's like, well, at that point, I had just lost a significant amount of weight. If I don't eat, then I stay skinny. So let's just go ahead and just throw that out there. I was bullied for how fat I was when I was in high school. So I'm at a new place where I literally know no one because I went to a college away from home.
Hmm.
And I'm skinny, and people are giving me attention. So I'm going to do whatever it takes in order to keep this attention because no one has treated me with respect before I was skinny. And no
Hmm.
one knows me as the fat kid that got skinny. Everyone just knows me as Becca, the normal looking person who's easy to talk to. And before that, I was not a quote unquote normal looking person.
Sure.
um, and so at least for society, because I, I've had people that have asked me this when I'm overweight versus underweight, or, you know, I say underweight. I've never gotten to my BMI weight because that's some bullshit.
Yes.
But like whatever weight I'm at, um, people treat me differently. People will like automatically respect everything that I have to say if I appear to be healthy. But if I'm overweight, people are questioning everything that I say or pushing me to, the back of the line because I might not practice what it is that I'm preaching. And
Hmm.
so, if anything, that experience kind of put that into perspective for me. But I started eating again and I was able to, you know, look at things differently. I definitely had a million different trials and tribulations that were happening when I was in college and a lot of unhealthy experiences. And so I think crisis management in college is very warranted.
Hmm.
And I've worked in agency settings and hospital settings, so I understand like the cycle, right?
Right.
And like you constantly have a million clients and a million stories, and there's burnout, and then there's people that don't think that you really need to be there. And so, yeah, it, he went into private practice, I think, when the school let go of the counseling program, and there was an option to see him off campus, but again, in order to get it covered by the school, you had to tell your peer
Yeah.
like
That's
everything that was going on with you. And I was like, I do not know her well enough to let her know my deepest, darkest secrets for her to decide if my therapy gets paid for. So
yeah.
I'm good. Peace.
Yeah, that's not a good system. Well, and I look at it in terms of systems of like, right, knowing administration is deciding that there's probably not a bunch of student input in those things. And so I don't know, it's hard for students to hold that system accountable. There's a big power imbalance there. But it is also in our current climate, like a mental health crisis stacked on top of a mental health crisis, stacked on top of a mental health crisis for a lot of, I'll go even into high school, 14 to 22-year olds. Like
Mhm.
they need some depth. And a lot of college
Yes.
campuses are approaching, we'll give you 2 sessions and then refer you out. And like that's not helpful for a lot of people.
No, and I had worked in a setting, um, when I first got my associate license, I worked in a halfway house for men
Hmm.
that had recently been released from prison. And because of Medicaid and payments and all that thing, all everything that was going in with it, I would see these men, I'd be the first therapist that they would see when they got out of prison, and then see them for their 3 sessions because they would get Medicaid for a month. And then all of a sudden they would get Blue Cross or Ambetter, and then the therapist could start getting paid. And
Hmm.
so it was like, well, now that I can get paid for these sessions, go ahead and pass them over to me. And it was always so disheartening to build these therapeutic relationships with people and then say, okay, now that you've told me all this really hard stuff in a history intake, I'm going to pass you on to this other therapist that you have no idea who they are.
Right.
Right. And sometimes in those crisis management situations, working in hospitals and colleges, even when I was working in youth ministry, it's that same thing. I can't solve your problems right now. So I can listen to you and build a relationship with you, but I can't solve anything because that's not my job. I
Hmm.
didn't like that formula, which is why I created my own practice because I was like, I want to be there from the beginning and I want to see you grow. I want to cry with you when we figure it out. And I want to be there in the moment and watch you flourish.
Hmm.
Um, and so those restrictive environments are so bad for mental health, but it's the only way for provisionally licensed therapists to get hours or to get paid, or it's the only way for, um, you know, just the cycle with insurance and
Yeah.
everything that goes on. And so
Yeah.
it's challenging.
So what was your journey from grad school then to the point where you're at now, owning your own practice, doing some of the things, and we'll get to those things that you focus on professionally now, but like
Yeah.
what was that? There's that journey from getting your hours, getting licensed, agency work usually, and then when did private practice kick in for you?
Yeah. So I actually graduated from Henderson University with clinical mental health in 2019, December of 2019.
Okay.
And um, shortly after that, well, we know what happened in 2020. And so
Hmm.
that was a tough year for sure. But at that point in time, I had completed my second internship before I graduated. And so I actually had during grad school, I had 2 internships. Both were in private practice settings. The first one was like traditional private practice, and the second one was in the halfway house that I worked in. And the halfway house that I worked in, they really liked me. They wanted me to stay there. So we attempted to bill Medicaid. Unfortunately, we learned you couldn't do that. Then Medicaid decided to audit. It was a whole entire shenanigan. And then I left and went to an inpatient hospital. And so during those experiences, though, I'll kind of rewind because sometimes my brain goes in 20 different directions. But the first internship that I had, um, it was a very interesting setting. Like I said, it was you get a client, you go to a room, you have a session with them, you see them again next week. They're either pro bono or low cost, and you're the intern. That's what it is that you do. And inside those supervision sessions, and I can also understand this now as a business owner and a therapist and someone that's provided supervision. Sometimes you're just overwhelmed, but I was consistently in supervision with a supervisor who was on their laptop answering emails, not really paying attention to what I was saying when I was trying to go through these cases. And when I was like, oh, well, every single one of my clients is just adjusting life transitions. So I give them adjustment disorder, right? It's like, yep, you just give them adjustment disorder. And so I wasn't like thinking about diagnosing, I wasn't really working through and understanding the different diagnoses that were going on. And then the supervisor that I had at the time was trying to make it to where it was a comfortable space where I could talk about my own issues. And I had, you know, I going through that conservative Christian religious abusive environment that I had been in when I was younger. I was still in that environment because where I went to school was in my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had left the youth ministry gig, and the person that was my abuser when I was growing up was my youth minister. And so physically, mentally abusive, the whole 9 yards, from the time I was like 12 until I left the church in 2018. And so it was like a good 10 plus years
Mm-hmm.
of that abuse. And so when I stopped being a youth minister, he was very skeptical about me going into counseling, obviously, because he had no control over it. And then I started dating my husband, which he really didn't like because now there's another man that's giving me attention and advice and
Mm-hmm.
telling me that I'm worth something. And well, he is the only one that should be telling me that I'm worth something because I need to be worth something to a point so I can give him what he needs. And so I was battling with those experiences, not really knowing that that was abusive at that time. I didn't know that grown men weren't supposed to hit teenagers. That was not something that I was taught. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what gaslighting was. I didn't know what trauma bonds were. I mean, like they don't teach you this stuff in grad school. And
Yep.
they teach you modalities and theories and old dead people, but they don't teach you about the things that you're really doing inside the counseling room. And so I'm getting these clients that are struggling with trauma, and I'm over here relating to it and understanding it. And then I'm telling the supervisor, and I'm like, this is making me think of this. And I'm trying to figure it out too. And ultimately, I got let go from that internship because the belief was that I could not have PTSD and be a therapist. And at that was
For for those of you who won't get the video and just see hear the podcast, I'm smirking real hard at like, oh shit, that's not accurate.
yep. So therapists aren't allowed to have mental health problems. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but we're not allowed to experience any mental health problems. We are Jesus, okay? And
Bad news. I need to end the podcast because none of us get therapy.
yeah, yeah, true. And so you can kind of see how all this is piecing together now. So it got to a point where it was like she was so intent on the fact that I shouldn't be a therapist, and I had offended her so bad that she called my professor and left him a 3-minute voicemail about why I shouldn't be a therapist. And he calls me and he says, Becca, why do I have a 3-minute voicemail from your supervisor for your internship saying that you shouldn't be a therapist? And I just download on him and just
Mhm.
tell him, this is everything that's happened. And he said, you have 1 week, find another internship spot. And so I did, and I went to the halfway house, and it was a great learning experience for me there. The supervisor that I had was very different. Again, also a business owner and also very busy, but a better experience. When I told her, I was like, I'm giving everyone adjustment disorder. She was like, no, stop. And so then I got very passionate about trauma and PTSD and adjustment disorder and like then working through all that.
Hmm.
And I've always been a person of community as well. So when I was, messaging our board and saying, I need answers for this, I don't understand this about my license, and they weren't responding, I started a support group for provisionally licensed therapists in Arkansas on Facebook. And I was like, let's go, let's do this. And so um, I really just started that journey of this is how I learned. I learned by teaching other people. I work best by teaching other people and working with other people that have similar problems that I do. And after ultimately, when I left that halfway house and went to an inpatient hospital and started seeing people that literally less than 24 hours ago were trying to kill themselves,
Hmm.
um, I was like, I love trauma. But just as any inpatient hospital or agency, you can't see 35 clients in one day and feel like a human at the end of the day.
Right.
And so that was it was very challenging. I ended up working with serious mental illness while I was there and just did not like that because I didn't have the patience for it. And it was very challenging for me. And so I ultimately left that after like 9 or 10 months and then finished out my associate license working for an online telehealth company that shall not be named. And that that company, it offered me an incredible salary, incredible benefits. I was like, oh my gosh, my work life balance is incredible. I love this. This is amazing. And then 2 months later, like, we cannot absorb the cost of your salaries and benefits. So we're cutting salary and benefits effective immediately. And I was right back at the bottom.
Hmm.
And I said I had, I think I had 200 hours left to go. And it was going to take me another year doing this like outpatient private practice type kind of setting. So I got on the crisis text line. I pulled some 12-hour shifts on the crisis text line to finish up my hours. And in that last hour that I had, I just remember like standing at my computer crying, like, if one more person says they want to kill themselves, like, I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. And I was just so challenged and it was difficult, but then it got to a point where I finally got my hours, I got my license, I got credentialed with insurance. I was going to go solo, but I ended up joining a group, which was just great transition. And then eventually I left there and created my own group. And so my
You just
resume is extensive. Um,
because you
I've been through it.
you did the speed run of
Yeah.
get into private practice, because some of us, that process that you went through takes 10, 12 years, and you are like, I'm gonna do it all real quick.
I completed my LAC in a year and a half.
Hmm.
Um, and that was my associate license. Sorry for those that aren't using the terminology, but I completed my associate license in a year and a half. And so I had gotten 1,500 direct hours in the 10 months that I worked at the inpatient hospital.
Yeah.
I was like very, very intense on going into private practice. And I had a goal that I wanted to be a in my terminal license when I got married because I
Hmm.
wanted to just start fresh with everything. I did not want to have to go through a name change with licensure and insurance
Yeah.
and everything. And so I was like, we're doing this all at once. This is happening and all that kind of stuff. So I was very determined. If you ask the supervisor that I ended up keeping through my whole entire LAC, um, she'd probably tell you the same thing that I was just outside my window of tolerance for the whole entire year and a half. And
Yeah.
I was just like in fight or flight, like, let's go. And then all of a sudden it was like, now I don't know how to not do things and I must destroy everything in my life.
Yeah. Well, and again, there's a lot of stuff in there that I think we could talk about. Internship placements really matter.
Yes.
And a lot of colleges advertise, or grad programs advertise, good placement, but not enough students know, and this was my situation too, not enough students know ahead of time how to check that and vet that, because that's very much
Totally.
about finding a good fit. And what happens is they have good placement, and I'm putting that in quotes because they can put you in a hospital setting or a homeless shelter. I worked at a homeless shelter. They can put you in this place where you're seeing really high intensity clients for short bursts of time, and you're going to get your hours, but you're not really learning how to do therapy. And so, and then once you graduate with your hours, or you graduate and you don't have your full license, you go work for a hospital setting, or you go take a 1099 position where you're getting
Yep.
half of your paycheck goes to the agency just to finish your hours. And again, like, if you don't have good supervision, if you don't have a good supervisor who is actually getting to know you, working with you towards your own therapeutic goals, like, you miss out on so much stuff just in this kind of cookie cutter education system we have of like everyone's gonna get the same factory approach. And I think it hurts the profession because a lot of us come out of grad school with our license and we know how to do the first 2 or 3 sessions, and then kind of like, what do we do now?
It's yeah. I feel like I nailed those first 3 sessions down like to a T. I knew how to do an intake. Man, I can rock an intake like nobody's business. I can rock an intake with someone that's completely dissociative the whole entire time and like not present. I can get that information real easily. I learned how to do that. Um, man, when I went into private practice, it was a whole other setting. I was like,
Hmm.
you potentially might see me for a couple months or a year or 2 years. And then all of a sudden you're faced with, how do I keep this interesting? How do I, and how do I be patient too? That was something that I think the fast pace part of my internship didn't teach me how to be. It's
Hmm.
like you are so focused because the environments are built for you to resolve a problem in a certain length of time. And then you go into this outpatient private practice world where I have some clients that I've been seeing for 2 years, and we're still working on the presenting problem
Hmm.
that they came in with, you know, which I love now, but it was a shock at the beginning because I was like, goals. Let's get this working. Goals, 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 goals. And then all of a sudden I'm like, Becca, you have to slow down. They're not ready for this. Like they're
Hmm.
coming to you because they're not ready for it. And that's just challenging to understand and process. There needs to be more education with actually how to do therapy, which I'm hopeful that I can bring that at some point in time in my career. That's a goal. That's not only a goal, it's a pipe dream, but I'm working on it. So
Yeah. Well, and like you said, grad school, we're taught modalities, we're taught theory, we're not really taught, you're doing, gosh, it's a long time ago for me, but hating to do these fake sessions with your other classmates who don't know how to,
oh
like,
my
and
gosh,
we're recording
yes.
them, and we don't know what we're doing. I did luck
I,
into a good intern placement where I actually
yeah,
learned how to do therapy then, and did my post grad right away because I loved my supervisors at that place. But
yeah.
like the grad school setting was not where I learned how to do therapy in any way, shape, or form.
No, no. I actually I'm a hoarder. Not with physical things, but with digital files. And so I have all the old videos that I have for my internship and grad school in a Dropbox. And I remember I watched it like a year ago. And one of the things that I noticed, I remember this actually vividly, sitting in a conference room table with one of my classmates, and I had a bottle of water with me. I'm always the person that carries a bottle of water with me wherever I go. I remember being nervous to drink the water. Like that was something that I was really nervous about. I'm like, my client's going to judge me if I drink water in front of them because then they're thinking that I'm not paying attention to them.
Hmm.
Like these are things that are going through my head, and these are things that are not addressed in the classroom, you
Yeah.
know, and things that aren't addressed in real life. I mean, how are you supposed to understand if you can't address these things?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you have a good supervisor, you have a good teacher. I remember one of my supervisors talking about, she wore slippers to session because her feet get cold. Just like, there's not a better reason than that. This is what makes me comfortable. If I'm comfortable, my clients are more comfortable, and I'm more present for them. We talked about, if I'm hungry, I'm going to have a sandwich. I'm going to offer half of it to my client so that it's not weird. And they might decline, they might take me up on it. It's okay either way. But like, I
Yep.
need to be able to be present for them. And so, like, again, you're not learning that stuff in class. If you have a good supervisor, they're teaching you some of those things.
Yep.
And I learned a lot from her. But it's just one of those things where, like, yeah, that's not. And in grad school, you're doing made up sessions with made up people with
Yeah.
other grad students who don't know anything about mental health either.
And then you're like scared to talk about what you're going through in those made up scenarios
Yeah.
because, you know, and I tell this story a lot, but one of the very first grad school classes that I had, and knowing that it took me, you know, 2 years to go through grad school, 2 years, 2.5 years, or whatever it was. But one of the very first grad school classes that I had, we were talking about diagnosing, but it was in my theories class. And I just, you know, I'm in there, we're learning about things. And I raised my hand. I said, so if you have a client that is hitting people or lashing out or, you know, stealing things, that's an adult male, like that's not oppositional defiant, would that be intermittent explosive disorder? And instead of like actually going through that response, the professor was like, this is happening to you, isn't it? You need to go to therapy. And it was like, I just got called out in front of all
Hmm.
these people that I have no idea. And now there's this image of me, at least that I'm saying, like, oh, wow, she's weak, right? Because she's not separating inside of this. You have to be a professional, and a professional can't have mental health challenges or question what's going on. And I think it almost goes back to that black and white thinking with religious trauma that we see as well is either you're good at what you do and you have no problems, or you're bad at what you do because you have problems.
Hmm.
And it's like the fat kid can't teach an exercise class, right? You know,
Yeah.
this whole concept of like you have to be what you preach, and that is so freaking challenging um, when you're a therapist because we have vicarious trauma. We have things that affect us all day long. We need to be able to talk about it. We need to utilize appropriate self disclosure. We need to work through our own stuff in our own therapy sessions. But how the hell are we supposed to do that when we're not even taught what it is that we're really doing in in and outside of the classroom and the therapy room?
Yeah.
It's so challenging.
Yeah, and so much of that, I think, we kind of complain about capitalism here, but like is based on we're learning how to diagnose from a medical model so that we get reimbursed, not because
Yep.
it's what fits for the client, not because it's what's helpful for our clients. We're approached with that like ghost of Freud, where we're this blank slate of a
Yep.
therapist, even if we're not doing psychoanalysis, even if we're not using a Freudian technique, we're still supposed to be like, I don't know, it's very bizarre. And I will say I find younger therapists are much more open to self-closure, and they're resisting that trend a little bit, which I think is good for the profession. Obviously, as therapists, we need to be able to help our clients and not have our own shit take over the session. But I think to show up genuinely and authentically is very validating for clients and their experiences. I talk about parenting a lot with my clients. We do couple stuff, and like, my house is dirty too, yo. Like, don't worry. Like, it's not worth having a panic attack over. It's okay
Right.
that we don't have everything perfect all the time.
Yeah. I think showing up authentically and genuinely is so freaking critical in therapy. And yeah, there is that blank slate thing that you were talking about, that it's this image of who we're supposed to be. I know I've niched down so much in my clientele that they don't want that. They want the stories, they want the metaphors, they look for that. But when I was working outside of the niche that I'm comfortable with, they didn't want that at all. And
Hmm.
so a lot of it is being a therapist and understanding like who the hell am I focusing on? You know, who is it that I'm working on? And making sure that I'm not just like throwing shit against the wall and hoping it sticks. Like you're good at something. Let's figure out what you're good at. And and focus on that. And documentation, like I'm actually working on, I coach some therapists on documentation and diagnoses now because since I didn't get that in my internship, that's something I'm very passionate about.
Hmm.
And I had one of my coaching clients ask me, like, well, I don't want to put that a client is being dramatic on the MSE because that's rude. And I was like, but it's appropriate for the diagnosis,
Right.
right? Like, if the diagnosis has that in the behavioral definition, then we put that. We're not saying that the client is dramatic. We're saying that the client has dramatic personality traits appropriate to the diagnosis. And I think that therapists were empathetic, we should be empathetic human beings that genuinely care about the person that's coming into our room. So to write these notes and to do this diagnosing, that's like, I'm making my client look like absolute shit on this paper. And it's like, no, no, we're doing this to protect them. We're
Hmm.
doing this medical model notes to protect them so their insurance pays for their therapy. And so, because let's use the system if we're going to have a shitty system, right? So their insurance pays for the therapy. And in case we ever have to go to court, like we've got it all right there, right? And it's a very challenging thing to be an empathetic therapist that has to write content and notes that's it's just so unnatural. And um I try and make it as comforting as possible.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, documentation's a whole separate thing. Again, just the medical model that's slapped onto the therapeutic model, and those should be two different professions that are approached differently.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, let's segue into what you work with now, because part of what you do is therapy for therapists, and then also this coaching work that you do for therapists to kind of bolster what we don't get in grad school, which is the business side of things, how to navigate being in practice and doing some of these things. So it sounds like some of that came from you needed to teach yourself how to do it because you didn't get it in grad school. So now you have this template for how to help other people with that.
Yeah. So I was, and just to give you guys, like, if you have a vivid imagination, then close your eyes and listen to this or imagine this, right? But I was third grade kid that my parents put a whiteboard on the wall in my bedroom, and I had a shit ton of stuffed animals, like a lot of them. And I still do. My husband, every single time we get into bed, he's always like, "They're on my side of the bed." And I'm like, sorry, get over it. But I had a day bed in my bedroom and a whiteboard on the wall. And whenever I was struggling with anything, I would teach that concept to my stuffed animals.
Mhm.
And so I was like, I knew it some way I was going to be a teacher. Like, and that's how I am inside of the therapy room and when I'm coaching with people. So I provide therapy for therapists, but I also provide coaching for therapists. And I think they're two very separate things. Um, the therapy that I provide for therapists, I'm located in Arkansas. So that's the environment. Like that's where I have it. I have my office in Springdale, Arkansas. Therapists come to me because they're trying to navigate their own mental health with what it is that they're struggling with. And I love doing that. But the coaching that I provide is very different. It's that we get to this moment inside of our head as therapists. You know, when I was leaving my inpatient job and going into some outpatient work in quotes through the telehealth company, and then also trying to figure out how this was applying to my own values, my own belief systems. Everything that happened in 2020 was like happening, and a lot of political things, and you have your own like faith crisis that's going on with that. And so I work really best on helping therapists untangle what it is that they actually want out of their life and developing their own value and belief system.
Mhm.
And so I feel like I do this really well through coaching. it's this idea that you come into this coaching atmosphere. You're like, I'm in a group practice, but the values don't really align with my values. I don't really know what my values are, but every time I work with this type of client, I feel like I connect really well with them. And so I'm working on understanding how your trauma, your past experiences really relate to your niche, right? And then I'm also like, what is your niche? What is it that you want to work on? How do you want to put yourself out there? You have gone to a lot of continuing education trainings. Which ones did you relate the most with? Where did you feel like you connected the most? And then being able to say, okay, I see these things in your personal life. This is probably the type of therapist that you should be looking for, because you do need therapy. Like coaching doesn't solve everything. And so it's like I'm helping you develop a business, or I'm helping you understand documentation, or I'm helping you understand your niche, or I'm helping you create your value and belief system, whatever it is that I can do. And then saying, maybe this modality would be really good. Why don't you try someone that has this modality or theory base and go, explore that with your own trauma there? Because, state lines prevent us from doing therapy across state lines unless
Hmm.
you're licensed. But I mean, I love doing that. I love working with therapists that really are just trying to get to the brunt of what it is that they're struggling with. Um, Sometimes it's hard to do that in 60-minute therapy sessions. And so I find that the very intensive coaching that I do allows for that.
Hmm.
And it really allows me it's a different type of relationship. I'm not doing a history intake. I'm not diagnosing you. I'm just saying, let's lay it all out here and figure out what we're dealing with. And when my caseload filled up to the point where it was like, oh my gosh, I don't have any more room, then I turned my practice, which is the therapy office, into a group practice. And every therapist that I hired was a therapist that was like, I could see myself being in therapy with this therapist.
Hmm.
I could see myself really being able to get good advice from this therapist. And so I've tried to create a space for therapists, for helping professionals, not just therapists, but anybody that's working in the helping profession to come and retreat and be able to have that confidential space so they can really work through their shit and understand how their trauma is affecting their day-to-day life and their careers, and how it's playing a big part in their day-to-day life too. And
Hmm.
so that's a little bit about what I do and how I work through it. It takes a lot though, and sometimes it can. It My brain is very ADHD, so I could definitely like I branch out in so many different ways. Like I have provisional license support a support group, and then I have coaching, and then I do this type of coaching and that type of coaching, and all these different prongs, and then I have online courses, and I just do all of this stuff because it's what I love to do, right?
Hmm.
I love to build and develop models, but I also love to learn and I love to teach. And so um it's a process for sure, but it's a good process.
Yeah, I think I've talked about it with some other guests who've been on the podcast, talking about like there are different chapters in our career. There are different things, especially my neurodivergent therapists that I've had on, of like, right, like if you have ADHD and you hyperfocus, like that might look like a
Yeah.
certain niche for a couple of years, and then it might shift. And if you've been in the profession for 10, 12, 15 years, like you're going to be able to look back and say, I worked with this for this point. I worked with this for this point. I also love, I relate a lot to what you're saying with coaching and teaching, because I've said for years, coaching, teaching, and therapy are all the same skill set, just applied
Yeah.
in a different context.
Yeah.
And so I coach, I have a background in sports performance and actually coaching
Nice.
sports. And so that's different than being an instructor at the college level, being different than doing therapy. But it's the similar skills I'm using. I apply them differently given the different contexts. And I
Yes.
think helping people with where they're at. Some people want space. They want to do the existential crisis and the question and do that work, and they don't want guidance. They just want someone to see them, to witness that and share space with them. Some people want to be coached. Some people want I am in crisis, help me.
Yeah.
And that looks a little different. And so being able to meet our clients where they're at and help them with what they're specifically looking for, I think, is what actually doing client based therapy looks like, instead of saying, I do it this way, and so hopefully all my clients respond well to, you know, whatever modality I picked in grad school.
I think it's yeah, I mean like and I did the like theory test or modality test whenever I was in grad school too. That was like, you're this type of therapist. You do client-centered or person-centered therapy. And I'm like, no shit, Sherlock. Like I mean, I hope that's what I do, you know. But I also I'm one of those therapists that does a really heavy screening with clients before they come into my office because
Mhm.
first of all, I have I'm a recovering people pleaser, and so I usually can't say, "Hey, no, this isn't a good fit" when they're in person. But man, once over the phone, I got it. Like I can do that. And so I do a heavy screening, and I'm very real with my clients. Like I use my personal experiences and my clinical knowledge to base like how I do therapy.
Mhm.
And when it comes to my expertise in religious trauma, I'm fully aware that that is very professional and personal.
Mhm.
And I have clients because I live in Arkansas. I know I have clients that are of the Christian faith, and some of them are of the Christian faith and currently going through religious trauma, but don't recognize it yet.
Mhm.
And so I'm the type of therapist that I'm going to separate from myself for a hot minute. And you want to understand scripture a little bit more? I've got my BIBLE. Like, let's go ahead. Let's go to town. Let's open it up. I'm not going to say, well, hey, I went through deconstruction. You have to go through deconstruction too, you know,
Right.
which I feel like there are some therapists out there because we're taught to do black and white thinking in our career, have trouble um, working through that. And
Mhm.
so I'm definitely here for it. Honestly, I just want to create a space for therapists, for clients, to be able to say, this is the stuff that I'm going through, and you're not going to judge me because of how I think about certain populations or certain niches or things of that nature. Because, like, I'm very clear, I work specifically with women, but that's just because of the abuse that I went through. I was in my own headspace when I was in therapy sessions with men,
Mhm.
because I'm coming home and I'm hearing gaslighting behaviors in the office. And then I come home and my husband says something. And I'm like, gaslighting me. And he is like, no. And I'm like, that's what a gaslighter would say. And he's like, I'm leaving this conversation. I'm like, and you would leave because you would get more power, you know? And so I found myself projecting, which is why
Mhm.
it's so, so critical for therapists to find their niche and find what helps them so that they aren't going through, vicarious trauma to the point of exhaustion and burnout.
Yeah.
And so I and I'm just me. I always when I'm in sessions, I always say the sentence. I'm like, I don't have ADHD. You have ADHD. Like we're all just trying to figure out. You said something 10 minutes ago, and I'm gonna be like, wait, no, you said this. Hold on, that connects. Like that just clicked in my brain, and we're gonna go through this process. So
Mhm.
it's a interesting atmosphere. I love what I do. Um, and I love the freedom that it gives me. And so when I saw your podcast, I was like, yeah, not only am I called out because I'm currently in the process of looking for my own therapist, but I was like, man, um, all the good therapists are my clients at my office. And so I need to, also, figure out what it is that I'm looking for too,
Mhm.
and how I process that in my own journey. And I just want to give permission to therapists that are out there that are listening to this. If there's something that's keeping you from it, um, I mean, check your own self, see if it is you that's getting in the way of your own healing.
Mhm.
We have such big boundaries that we put up 24/7 that we're afraid to go into those vulnerable relationships with anybody else. Um, so
Yeah.
And I'm here to help guide you through it. So send me an
Yeah. Well,
email.
and you brought up that uh even in religion, after religion, in the psychology field, dogma of any kind can be harmful
Yeah.
when we're too dogmatic about that. So I want to highlight that. And I think, yeah, like transference isn't just between therapists and clients. Sometimes we as therapists take that home. Sometimes that goes towards our family or our kids or our coworkers or whatever. And so we might be great in the room with clients, but we're still carrying that stuff somewhere. And so having space to explore that, to be able to work through that in a healthy way is really great. And like, yeah, you're in Arkansas, I'm in Wisconsin. Like sometimes it's a lot of work to find a therapist who isn't in your social circle, who you don't work with professionally, who's a good fit for you. And
Yep.
so sometimes, yes, it is work for us, but I think that's a good reminder that like it's work for our clients to find a good fit too. And that fit is absolutely worth it when we're looking for someone who's going to be helpful to us.
Yeah. And the awesome thing is that we have access to telehealth now. And
Mhm.
so um, telehealth allows us to go outside of our immediate social circles to find the best fit inside of our state um, for someone that could really be, helpful for us. And so I know I have therapists from all over the state that see me because they don't want to see a therapist inside of the town that they're working in.
Mhm.
And so I'm like, let's do it. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
It's we have that opportunity, and it's very important. And if you're going to be a therapist that offers telehealth services to other therapists, or um, if you're going to offer any sort of web-based anything to anybody, it's having that welcoming and inviting space, the same welcoming, inviting space that you would have in your own office.
Mhm.
um, Developing up a professional atmosphere for change. And so it it's a fun little experience for sure.
Yeah, it is. Becca, this has been awesome. If people want to learn more about you, if they want to check out your practice, if they want to find the stuff you're putting out on the internet, some of these online classes and workshop type things, where do they go? Where do they find your stuff?
Yeah, so if you just Google Becca Ferguson LPC, then I pop up, which I'm very thankful for that. But if you are a fan of The Office, like Steve Carell is a genius fan of The Office, then check out my therapy office. It's called The Therapy Office, themed after The Office. And it's, which I can't take all the credit for. My husband came up with the idea, which I wish that I would have been it, but that's beside the point. It's not a competition. It's fine. But I own the therapy office. It's in Springdale, Arkansas. If you are a therapist that's listening to this inside of Arkansas and you do want therapy, you're looking for a good fit, I have several clinicians that have immediate availabilities, and I'm ready to welcome you in and find your space. So you can find me on thetherapyofficear.com or beccafergusonlpc.com. And I would love to talk with you and figure out what it is that you want to deal with.
And we will have all those links in the show notes so they are easy to find. Becca, thanks so much for taking the time and chatting today.
Of course, I'm here for it. I love doing this kind of stuff, so I'm glad we could chat.
And to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for tuning in again. We will be back next week with another new episode. Take care, everyone.